Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Wrestling Doesn't Make Sense. It's a pro wrestling podcast, the only pro wrestling podcast on the internet. As far as I'm aware, I've never heard another one.
No,
You
same
ever?
here.
I've never listened to. I didn't even know other podcasts existed other than ours, but apparently other ones do. But none about pro wrestling. Not a single goddamn one, as far as we are aware. So, funny enough, we are going to talk about some stuff that happened in the wrestling world last week because not only are we the number one podcast in town, but also clearly we're, cutting edge when it comes to news breaking. We're right on there. We're right on it. This should happen, just about a week ago.
Yep.
I think this happened last week, right after we taped last week's episode.
Yeah, I think I'd say about like 2 hours maybe after we finished taping.
Yeah, so the whole week we saw this news and we're like, oh boy, this would have been great had you done it, 12 hours ago. So we could fucking talk about it. Thank you very much. You see that? The WWE are inconveniencing everybody, including us, these poor podcasting folks. We're doing the best we can, and look at what we're being given.
Exactly. And yeah, think how much responsibility we've got as the only wrestling podcast game in town as well.
Exactly. We're the only place where wrestling fans come and get their wrestling news from. And it's a very telling time whenever you look at the numbers and you see that we're getting 5 listens and we're like, there's only 5 wrestling fans left? Oh, boy.
It kind of makes sense, though.
Well, exactly. When you see the TV shows, you're like, I can see why there are nobody watches this show anymore. Yeah, so it's a great time all around. Basically, a lot of people got released from their jobs, which, when you think about it, isn't a great time all around at all. And I don't know why I said that. That was probably ill-timed. But hey, we're the only podcast in town, so we can do what we want. You can say whatever you want. What are you going to do? Listen to a different podcast? I don't think so. So, some of these releases were from the WWE. This is a month after they already released some people after WrestleMania.
Mm-hmm.
And normally they release people after WrestleMania anyway. It's kind of spring cleaning, and they freshen up the roster a little bit, make some jumps from NXT, keep things fresh. That wasn't too much of a surprise. It was a surprise who they cut as opposed to when they cut them.
Yes, yeah.
And then a month later, they cut some more people, which is another surprise because you're like, well, why didn't you cut these people with the other spring cleaning? Why have they suddenly been cut? Is this a monthly occurrence? Is this going to happen after every big pay-per-view? And again, some of the people that were cut were surprising because of who they were and how they'd been focused on TV. Last month, for example, Billie Kay was on TV right up until her release.
Yeah, she was on WrestleMania like days before her release.
Exactly. So for her to be released, that didn't make any... It seemed to come out of the blue because she was being featured heavily and she was on TV. And similarly enough, Braun Strowman had been focused quite heavily on TV right up until the point he got released.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very strange. Aleister Black was, after months of not being used at all, they finally bring him back TV for 3 weeks? 2 weeks?
I think maybe like 2 weeks of vignettes and then 1 week where he actually got to attack Big E.
Oh, and then that was it. Thanks for coming. Which is strange because he'd been there for a long time anyway. Like, that's strange because they finally give him TV time and then they cut him. That one's unusual. Who else was on that list?
So we had Ruby Riott, who also was just on TV like the previous week on SmackDown, I think. The Riott Squad were in action. You had Lana, who again was being like used fairly regularly on Raw in a tag team with Naomi. Buddy Murphy, who hadn't really been used at all since the storyline with Seth Rollins and the Mysterios kind of got dropped. And then Santana Garrett, who just, I don't know what they were planning with her, because they signed her to NXT a few years ago and then basically didn't use her on there. and then they decided we'll call her up to the main roster, and then she never even debuted on TV. Well, I guess she made like a Royal Rumble appearance, but that was about it. And yeah, so what was the point of that?
You know, except for the Royal Rumble appearance, that was exactly what they did to me. You didn't see him in NXT TV at all, and then I got called up to the main roster. You didn't see me on TV, and I swear it happened. It really did. But it's just they never used me on TV or for anybody to be able to see it and use it as evidence. But it's just the way it goes, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess so.
That's that damn company. They don't even care about themselves. Santana Garrett. Now, yeah, that's a shame because they were too stupid to use her. But again, like that felt like kind of spring cleaning. Right? Like you said, they had this girl there for so long and they weren't using her at all. So that kind of makes sense. Although she used to be in TNA, I think, didn't she?
She did indeed, yeah.
Because I think she would have been there right before I stopped watching that show.
Mm-hmm.
So if she is who I remember her being, she's pretty good.
Yeah.
So it's a shame that she wasn't on TV. Ruby Riott is a real talent, a real good person to have around. I think she will be fine when it comes to appearances outside of the WWE. She was one of those people. There's a couple of people that the WWE will sign and you go, are you sure about that?
Yeah.
And then they don't use them right and then they get released and you go, well, at least they got a couple of years of money out of that. Most of it's the dudes. And I think Ruby Riott, pretty much her entire WWE run, you were like, you don't know what to do with this girl. They didn't know what the hell to do with it. Like, they had the Riot Squad. It looked really cool. They all looked distinct and interesting. And then that whole run, just nothing happened.
But they never even really explained what the Riot Squad was as well, or why they were together. Because, like, Ruby Riott, Liv Morgan, and Sarah Logan were all such completely different characters. It's like, what's the kind of thing that brought them together and unified them here? Because it was never explained, and even without that, they kind of still went out there and did their job and got over to a certain extent as well. So,
well, yeah, I wish the thing they had explained was just that, because I assume the reason they're all together is because they're all misfits, right? Sarah Logan was a vampire. Not a vampire, a Viking. Whoa. She might be a vampire.
Who knows?
I didn't know. She's clearly a Viking, but I didn't ask her about the vampire thing. And Ruby Riott, she's like a punk rock girl. And then Liv Morgan is just like, somebody who just didn't fit in somewhere else. And she, finds kindred spirits with these other two people. If they'd explained it like that, which took me 2 seconds, although I did accidentally call somebody a vampire, but you see what I mean. It took no time at all to come up with that, and that would explain the whole thing. No problem. But they didn't do that, and that's what I mean. They didn't give that stable the time of day at all. Here's the thing, man, and people aren't gonna like this because people love Liv Morgan. She's gonna be the next one.
Yeah, I think so.
100%, dude, and that's a shame. But again, she's so young. This is hardly gonna be the last time that Liv Morgan's in the WWE. I say this whenever she still works there. But like I feel like they're not going to know what to do with her either.
Yeah.
And she's the kind of person that they could cut and then bring back way later if they wanted to. Which is that's the kind of things happened before. Worked for Drew McIntyre. There's another wrestler like that I want to talk about. And I'll maybe talk about that later. A guy who we said for a long time, maybe we'll talk about it now. Fuck it. There was a guy that we said for a long time was stuck in the WWE machine. And, if he ever left, he would have a chance on the independents because people would look at this guy and go, there's a guy that didn't get the right shake. And he'll, on the independent scene, he'll lap it up. They'll be throwing money at him. And that guy was Zack Ryder.
Yeah.
Okay. Now this is news we can report on. Have you seen this?
The stuff with Nick Gage, was it?
Yes.
Yeah. I thought that was brilliant. I loved the fact that he came out with the hood and everything, and then he did like the John Moxley kind of shimmy of the shoulder and hit the Death Rider or whatever they call it now, paradigm shift, and then fooled everyone. And then he just starts cussing them out as well as soon as he unmasks. It's beautiful.
Yeah, he's gonna die.
Yeah,
They're gonna kill him.
probably, but it was
Zack
worth it
Ryder.
for that moment.
Now here's the thing, right? We can both applaud him for having some stones, right?
Mm.
Ballsy move. He didn't have to do that. Like we said, that guy could make his money on every other independent wrestling show, any other wrestling company,
Yeah.
right? He doesn't have to play the hardcore game. And instead of that, he thought, no, I'm gonna show them. I'm gonna show them that I'm smarter than them by doing it too. And here's a guy that, like, God bless him, has spent most of his time in the WWE system.
Yeah.
Right? This guy, Nick Gage, he cut David Arquette's throat.
Yes. He
For
did indeed.
real. He legitimately did.
Have you seen the Dark Side of Wrestling episode about him yet?
I sure haven't.
Oh, check it out. It's pretty enlightening.
In a good way or a bad way?
Kind of both, really. He's had a hard life, and he kind of turned to wrestling, and decided that the hardcore wrestling was his niche, and that obviously came with a bit of a cost. And he had some really dark years, particularly when he, got arrested for robbing a bank and spent several years in jail. So,
And then that's the guy you want to piss off? You know
probably
what I mean?
not. Yeah.
I feel like, and obviously, like, up to this point, it's a work, right?
Yeah.
Right? We all know this. But once it's in the ring, like, hey, again, ask David Arquette. It was a work all the way up till they got into the ring. And then David Arquette realized, hey, this guy lied. This guy said he wasn't going to cut me, but he's cutting me. I mean, I haven't seen this documentary, so I don't know the character of this Nick Gage fellow. But he does, after you've described the whole bank robbing thing and the aforementioned throat slashing, I don't know if I could trust that guy. That's what I'm thinking. And again, I've never met him, but I don't want my throat slashed. I don't think I will meet him. Like, imagine Nick Gage started calling one of us out.
Oh God, I hope he never does.
Right? Should we turn up and go, let's work out a deal?
No way.
No, we shouldn't do that at all. But hey, Zack Ryder's gonna do that. And you know what? I'm sure those really hardcore guys totally love a guy who just collects action figures and collectible cards.
Yeah.
I mean, I see no issue with this. Am I the only one who thinks this is insane?
I mean, it's pretty nuts, but fair play to Zack Ryder or Matt Cardona, whatever you want to call him now. He's branching out and he's trying new things, and good for him.
Trying new things. Oh God, I can't wait to be said, God, fair play to him once he doesn't have an ear anymore, and not in the Mick Foley kind of way. Vader didn't intentionally cut his fucking ear off, right? Nick Gage totally would. So, what we're saying is, Ruby Riott, you don't have to do that.
No.
I wouldn't advise that. I mean, if you want to start cutting bitches' ears off, you go for it. But I don't think you need to go down the hardcore, the extreme hardcore. I mean, there's a difference between hardcore wrestling and, like, light tube wrestling.
Yeah.
It's ultra violence, isn't that what they call it?
That sounds about right, yeah.
Right. We can all enjoy a good hardcore match. I don't know if I could sit through a light tube on fire barbed wire match. Gonna be honest with you, dude. I don't think I could stomach it.
No, not my cup of tea.
You don't have to do that. Wrestling was already in a position where you didn't have to get hurt.
Mm-hmm.
They had it set up. They already set it up so that you could do it and not get hurt and make it look like it hurts. And then people will go, wow, that looked like it hurt. And you're sleeping like a baby. They had a system that worked perfectly. And now look at it. Now you have half of it where it all looks fake. And everybody goes, boy, it looks fake. And then you have another half that isn't wrestling, but is real. And they go, well, that looks stupid. And that's all we get. Well, I mean, come on, guys. What happened? Again, am I the only one that thinks that that's a little ass backwards?
Yeah, it's not ideal.
Because that's what gets me. I'm sorry to derail this whole fucking thing about hardcore. Well, I'm like, at some point, like, ultraviolet wrestling isn't wrestling anymore. Just people hitting each other with that stuff.
Yeah,
right?
like legit trying to injure each other.
Right. So you're like, well, what point is this? Like, just because it's in a ring, none of this is wrestling. None of it. Like, what the fuck? But they're like, this is wrestling. I'm like, you know, there's not a headlock. There's not, not a single abdominal stretch in the whole building. You know, it is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
I don't get why they continue to call it wrestling. Right? I mean, if they're that insistent on doing it, you're like, it's just brawling. It's just having a fight. It's just real. It's just two people actually having a fight.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily wrestling. Right? It's just fucking fight.com. If you saw two people coming out of a bar having a fight, you go, here's some pro wrestling.
Well, I'd start selling tickets to people on the street if I could.
You'd be selling t-shirts.
Yeah.
T-shirts we made with somebody else's face on them. All right, I guess we should circle back away from the hardcore wrestling.
Yeah, we got pretty far from what we were talking about there.
Yeah, I got a little distracted. But so yes, back on track. Here we go. Ruby Riott, I feel like, will be pretty fine. And I'm actually kind of excited to see her go somewhere else because, you know, the problem we've been having with the increase of wrestling products to consume without the increase of viewers to consume those products is that there's a lot more room for, hypothetically, there's a lot more room for these people to be seen and get over. But a lot of the time, it's just the dudes.
Yeah.
If the WWE releases some dudes, those dudes are going to show up on Impact or AEW. And now that Ruby Riott has been released, I feel like we're actually going to see a really good women's wrestler be really good at what she does somewhere else. I would love to see her go to Impact because they have a really good women's division. Everybody knocks Impact, and sometimes rightly so. But the one thing you can't really take away from them is that for a long time, they have had their women's division in check. They've been really good with that. And so every time somebody's released, if it's a woman, I'm psyched to see them go to Impact because I feel like that would be the best place for them to show that kind of stuff off. And now that Ring of Honor have started up a women's division as well, I mean, that would be pretty cool as well if you saw Ruby Riott turning up there.
Yeah.
I think that would be nice. As much as people want to see, you know, all these talents go to AEW, I feel like, to be honest, a lot of people just want to see them get another payday. Right? They just want to see them keep earning money because sometimes people go to AEW and you're like, you'd be better off sleeping. You know, God bless them. But FTR, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Well, Sean Spears as well, a guy who kind of got fed up with not being used properly in WWE, so he asked for his release so he could go and, you know, seek greener pastures, and oh no, it's just the same shit on a different day.
They're not going to use them on AEW either. And then they do. They finally, after not using these fuckers for ages, they finally use them. What do they do with them? Just make them lose all the time. I mean, it boggles the mind. So I really wouldn't want to see a person like Ruby Riott go to AEW because they don't have their women's division on lock. You know, As much
But
as they
then
might want to pretend they do, they
maybe
don't.
having someone like Ruby and some of the other releases that have happened over the last few months, like adding those to the women's division would help kind of elevate it. You'd hope at least.
Well, that's what they should have done from the start, and they could have. They had some people there, and they could have done that, and they didn't. It's very unusual. And here's the thing I will say about AEW is that their women's division has been on lockdown since the pandemic. I mean, since we all locked down in real life, the AEW just said we'll put a freeze on this women's division.
Yeah.
They didn't do anything except Britt Baker.
Mm-hmm.
Not a goddamn thing happened. I mean, poor Hikaru Shida, who was the champion for that entire time and didn't do a goddamn thing. You know, you could tell me a couple of the good matches she had, right?
Yeah.
She didn't work a program with anybody. She didn't do anything with anybody, and then she lost the belt to Britt Baker. You know, which wasn't a program; it was just a match that we all knew was going to happen anyway. So I feel like now that they have Britt Baker as champion, which is what they wanted to do a year ago, I'm hoping that they will start to take it seriously now, which again is a shame for Hikaru Shida, where they saw her reign as a really long ass stopgap.
Yeah.
It's you know, hideous how badly they've treated that women's division, and I really hope that now that we're getting fans again, they will start to take it seriously again. But I wouldn't hold your breath for that, right? I really wouldn't. But that whole company, just stuff happens, and you're like, I don't. Wasn't Vicky Guerrero managing Nyla Rose?
Yeah, I think she still is, and I think she's just brought in Andrade as well.
Is that legit though? Like, did she bring him in because she's gonna manage him too? Because do you think that's a good idea?
Well,
Do you think pairing Andrade with Vicky Guerrero is a good way to get Andrade over?
The thing is, he doesn't need a manager to get over, but his act when he was in WWE and had Selena Vega with the manager worked pretty well. So
yes,
I can
but
kind of
Selena Vega and Vicky Guerrero are two very different people.
Yeah. But I mean, I like Vicky Guerrero. I always have. I thought she's punched above her weight for so long because, you know, she doesn't have that wrestling background or anything, but she took to it like a duck to water and was an absolute heat machine back in the day when she was SmackDown general manager. So I think she's someone who you can easily use to make the crowd hate like a wrestler if she's like the sort of manager for them. But obviously we haven't really seen that with Nyla Rose so far because of because of a couple of reasons. One being obviously there hasn't been crowds or big crowds for a long time. And of course, like AEW don't tend to put too many women on Dynamite each week. So it's not like they're getting a lot of airtime. So
exactly. If Vicky Guerrero can't accurately manage the one person she's already managing, is it a good idea for you as a guy looking to make an impact in that company to sign to that person's management?
Well, I mean, if it's a dude though, and they kind of, at least kind of use the male wrestlers a lot more than they do the female wrestlers on Dynamite, then in theory, he'll get more TV time and still be able to get out there and stuff. And
I mean, yes, in theory, but number one, we've seen the way AEW uses their managers, which is also baffling. it's just, I don't understand that shit at all. But number two, don't you think Andrade would be able to do that by himself to
Probably.
exactly the same, if not better, success? You know what I mean? Like, I don't see why that's a good idea to pair him up with Vicky Guerrero. Like, surely you would think Vicky Guerrero's got her own stuff going on, right? She needs to, this is another thing that company doesn't get. They're like, not only do people manage, but they manage like groups of people. They have to do that. That's the deal now. You know, Taz with Team Taz. But has he managed any of them to any success?
Well, if you count Brian Cage being awarded the FTW world title,
And who gave him that title?
Taz did, obviously, but
Exactly. Would you say that you were a good manager if you got your client £1,000, and by that you meant you just gave him £1,000?
out of your own pocket,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what a great manager you are. I can't wait to see what other success befalls your guy, you know? But
Mm.
like Matt Hardy, he's a manager now, apparently.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the success he's had with all the people he's managed.
Uh,
Exactly. The managers don't manage anything. They don't do anything. They have no purpose. They don't help people in matches. They don't. They manage people, but they don't manage them towards any kind of success,
mm-hmm.
which negates the point of having a manager. It's just now you have to pay this guy 20% of your fee to hang out with him.
I think it's 30% with Matt Hardy.
Oh well, of course it would be. Poor guy. It's hard to keep payments on a giant mansion, you know, with all his butlers and stuff.
Drones.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and all the fucking it takes money to keep a lake nice and healthy. You have to skim it, a little pool skimmer, you know.
Well, Lake of Reincarnation as well. I imagine that takes a lot more upkeep than a regular lake.
Oh, you have no idea. It's a nightmare. I mean, he's starting to regret ever buying it. It's only paid off for him once.
Yeah.
What happened? Gangrel appeared or something?
I don't even want to think about it.
If that's what happens with your Lake of Reincarnation, you're like, it's nice and all, but I would have liked something a little more exciting than Gangrel just turning up. We've been sidetracked again.
We've been massively sidetracked.
I like it. It's more fun this way. We were talking about managers. Well, speaking of managers in AEW, I've heard people say that Lana would be a good fit for AEW because Miro is there, formerly Rusev.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if that's a good idea. Do you think it's a good idea for AEW to just completely retread the old ground that WWE did?
Well, I mean, I think it might be something that Lana and Miro would want to happen because they'd probably want to work together again. But
right, but is that best for business? We've said this before, especially in regards to Miro. Like just because the talent thinks it's a good idea,
mm-hmm.
does that mean it's a good idea? Right?
No, exactly. And this, well, I mean, Miro's just sort of finding his feet now as in AEW and finally being portrayed as a monster and not like a goof paired with like, borderline jobber characters.
Who thought that was a good idea?
Ugh,
that
God knows.
Blows my mind. And like now you look at Miro and you go, yeah, exactly, right?
Mm-hmm.
But why did you wait 6 months?
Yeah.
Good God. I don't know if that would be a good mix. I mean, I think Lana and Miro work really well together. Yeah. Obviously, they have great chemistry together. But I don't think now is the time for it. But you know what I do think they're going to do? I think they're going to do some kind of stupid bait and switch thing.
Okay.
Just like the WWE did. But of course, the AEW does is great. I think they're going to make it seem like they're going to pair Lana and Miro up naturally. And then Lana's going to end up managing somebody else to go against Miro. Right?
It just seems fucking dumb.
Yes, it does. And then I wouldn't be surprised if 3 months later, Lana turns on that person to side with Miro because that was their plan all along. A plan that only makes sense to them. Mark this down. Oh my God, if this happens, if this happens, I'm going to be, well, it doesn't matter because we're the only podcast game in town, I suppose. So everybody will know to come back to this specific podcast and mark it down because the only podcast in town. But like, I would not at all be surprised if that happened. Because that doesn't that sound like something they've already done?
Probably, yeah. I mean,
right? You're like, I feel like they've definitely done this kind of shit together. Yeah, at some point, which isn't a good way to run a business. Can I sidebar one more time about AEW?
Good grief! Okay, go on.
You're gonna hate it. You're gonna hate it, but it's important. It needs to be said. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
What do most people hate the most about the WWE?
Oh, that's a tough one because there's so much to hate. The goofy dolls that haunt the place.
Yes. I'm gonna right. The goofiness.
Yeah.
Right? Everybody unanimously agrees the one thing they can't stand about the WWE these days is the goofiness.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree that I am not a big fan of Shayna Baszler being scared by a doll. Because I am a big fan of Shayna Baszler. And I am a
Yeah.
big fan of Alexa Bliss. And I'm a big fan of dolls. Me and Zack Ryder, we're both collectors of dolls. We both love it. So seeing Shayna Baszler being afraid of a doll, not so cool. You know? I don't like, but also that's no different from any of the other gimmicky bullshit that WWE have done this year and last year, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It's still part of the course. They're still in the Thunderdome. There's still plenty of time for this gimmicky bullshit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to direct everybody's attention to current AEW World Champion Kenny Omega,
Mm-hmm.
and to a lesser extent the Young Bucks.
Yeah.
What do I hate the most about those guys? And I don't hate Kenny Omega, but I hate his promos because he's terrible at promos. Right? Every time I've seen that guy talk, it's been awful.
Yeah.
Awful, right? Because he's really goofy about it.
Mm-hmm.
He's
Yeah.
really goofy. The way he does his promos and the way he does his outside wrestling stuff, outside the ring, it's all really goofy. Right?
Yeah.
The Young Bucks, they're really goofy. They're always hamming stuff up because they don't know how to act. They're always doing these goofy things on being the elite and behind the scenes, and they're all just they're not taking it seriously. They've been a bunch of goofy assholes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, my question to you, my good friend Jonathan. I don't know if that's your full name.
It is, yes.
Okay, cool. That worked out perfectly. I put it to you then, my good friend Jonathan. Don't you find it unusual that the people who decry the WWE for their goofy bullshit also unanimously love Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks?
I mean, it's just the way of the world now. It's the same when you look at like the divide between, like Republicans and Democrats and stuff like that. You have to be in your camp and firmly behind your camp no matter what it does.
Yeah.
So
despite the fact that both camps are on fire.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no sort of even-handedness about it. Like you can't look at something that the other side is doing and say, oh, okay, that's pretty cool or anything like that. You have to toe the line, and even if it's absolute shit that you're trying to defend, you have to defend it to the bitter end.
Yeah, and like God knows, we've been pretty, we've had a lot to say about stuff.
Yeah.
On all sides. But you know what? It's good being the only podcast in time because it means we're the most impartial podcast as well.
Yeah, I'd like to think so.
Yeah, we're the most impartial podcast because simply none other podcast exists.
Mm-hmm.
It's only us, and therefore we're pretty impartial. We hate the WWE and AEW and probably all the other ones too. Because at some point they fucking. I just thought that was funny. I thought that was like I was thinking about it. I'm like, I just think that that's worth mentioning. That every fucking person that hates the WWE, and God knows I hate it too, right? But they all love Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks. I'm like, well, you can't look at one company's goofy bullshit and hate it and applaud another company's goofy bullshit. Although I will admit the WWE are going further with the goofy bullshit, right?
Oh yeah, massively so.
But at the same time, you can't deny that there is goofy bullshit happening on both sides.
Yeah. But then this brings us nicely back to the topic at hand, because
segues.
I think like these releases that we've seen last week and just after WrestleMania are kind of indicative of how the WWE system is failing. Because most of these guys have come up through NXT, where NXT has done a good job of like sort of preparing them for the main roster and in a lot of cases establishing these characters and figuring out like how best to use them. But then when they get brought up to Raw or SmackDown, they don't get used the same way, and it just seems like they the main roster writers or whoever just don't know how to use them. They don't know their strengths and weaknesses and, where best to put them on the card and stuff. And they just end up getting lost in the WWE machine. And then, it comes around that Vince or whoever thinks that they don't really have a worth for the company. They can't make money with them. It's like, well, the only reason you can't make money with them is because you've just squandered them for the last 3 years, and like in some cases just let them sit on the sidelines, like with Aleister Black for like pretty much a year now, where he's basically done nothing at all because they couldn't figure out what they wanted to do with him or how to present him on Raw or SmackDown. It's just baffling. Like, Aleister Black was such a good character in NXT, always delivering good matches and like super over with the crowd and everything. And then bring him up to the main roster, just stick him in a random team with Ricochet, and then just kind of lose interest. It seems it's where's the plan? Why are you bringing these guys up if you don't have a plan to use them and like a direction to take them in?
Well, think about the three guys you just mentioned, like Aleister Black, but also Ricochet and Andrade. All three of them got called up from NXT to the main roster. And what happened to any of them?
Yeah.
Like, what a shit show on all sides. And you could say that, like, all three of those guys deserved a way, way better shake than what they got, because they were all very different. Ricochet is quite a high flyer and does a lot of spinny moves and stuff. Aleister Black, he's got an athletic side, but he's also got size and strength on his side,
And those kicks as well.
Yeah, he's got a really good, strikes.
Yeah.
He's got a really good, martial arts kind of air to him. Andrade's got that whole, he's a great heel. He's really good, and he represents, a good market that the WWE themselves have admitted they want to break into.
Yeah.
So those three guys, they represent different parts of your audience that might be interested, and different parts could all tune in and see that guy and go, I identify with that guy. I like him. And they threw all of them away, and that is bizarre. It's very strange. I don't get it. And again, like I said earlier, some of these guys that have been released, you feel like are going to come back eventually.
Yeah, I would have thought so.
Braun Strowman's going to sit at home for a couple of years, and then he's going to realize that he got really lucky and will probably come back for G's paycheck.
Did
you hear how much they were paying that guy?
Apparently $1 million a year, wasn't it?
Yeah. So in that case, I kind of see where they cut him.
Yeah.
Because nobody makes $1 million.
But it's just strange that, he's one of the guys who did get a major push and was used pretty damn well. Like, they established him with all the stunts and stuff that he did, and then he beat Goldberg at last year's WrestleMania and Shane McMahon at this year's, and then...
Well, that's the thing. I thought originally, when I heard Braun Strowman had been released, I was like, why would they release Braun Strowman? The guy's on TV. The guy's been featured prominently. The guy who they have used in their main event, they've used prominently a lot. And when they say budget cuts, it totally makes sense that they would cut a guy who they've guaranteed $1 million a year, which is ridiculous anyway. Guaranteeing a guy $1 million a year right before they're getting ready to start touring again. Because they gave him that contract. When was that? The end of 19 or whatever?
I think so, yeah.
Maybe beginning of 2000. So they kind of paid him for a year where they were saving money by not touring, but also they weren't making any specific money off him. So it was really hard to tell whether or not that contract was worth the money. So they used him as a main eventer for a while. They've released him now, presumably to save having to pay him another $2-3 million for no reason, because they know they're going to get him back again, right?
Yeah.
There is a guy that hasn't worked anywhere else. He's only worked in the Performance Center and probably doesn't know how to work on the independents with a lot of these other people, because as we all know, there's a WWE style and there's an everywhere else style. And he's such a big guy. I don't see him putting up with a lot of the bullshit that the people on the indies do these days. I don't see why he would bother. Honest to
Yeah.
God, I feel like he would just kind of. He's done strongman competitions and stuff before. He's the kind of guy that would keep himself fit and busy and active by doing stuff like that, strongman competitions and etc., and keep himself in shape just in case the WWE want to call him. Because I guarantee you, a couple of years down the line, they'll do it, but they're like, all right, here's the deal. It's a reduced contract because obviously we can't give you $1 million a year. That's ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I can see that happening with that guy. He'll be fine. You know.
Yeah.
Should we talk about the rumors that the WWE are gearing up for a seal? Because, like I said, with the Braun Strowman thing, at first I thought the only reason that they're getting rid of the people like this, the guaranteed money and all this stuff, is to save money in order to make it more presentable for people to buy it. You know, that way they're not. If you were to buy this company, for example, and you looked at the books and you saw you were giving $1 million a year to that guy, that doesn't look as appealing. But if you cut that bit out and then if you trim the edges to it and then use that to present it to a potential buyer and go, look, you know, we can make this much money, we're putting out this much money, etc., then you can balance the books and make it look appealing. So at first I thought, yes, they're gearing up for a sale. Can be the only explanation. But then once you realize Braun Strowman was making $1 million, you're like, well, I can see why they cut Bret Hart because they couldn't be bothered paying him $20 million.
Yeah.
Right? Bret Hart. They cut Bret Hart at a time when, number one, their competition was incredibly hot, and number two, wrestling, you know, he was absolutely the best wrestler in the world at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Him or Shawn Michaels, right?
Yeah.
Who both worked for that fucking company. You would do. He was worth. If Bret Hart, if anybody is worth $1 million a year, it's fucking Bret Hart, right?
You'd have thought so.
Jesus Christ. So they cut Bret Hart when wrestling was super hot and they really needed him just to save $19 million because they paid him the one. They paid him $1 million and then he got kicked in the head by Goldberg. Good God, you know. So yes, you could see why they would just want to cut that guy for the moment and save that money. And again, some of the other releases are kind of shocking, like when you think about how they're being used on TV, but also think about how they're being used on TV. For example, Lana was being on TV, but good God, what was she doing? You know, like she'll be doing something this week, and then she'll be doing something next week. And it was the same with the Ruby Riott. You know, Ruby Riott's back, but no, she's not part of the Riot Squad. And then 3 months later, now the Riot Squad are back together. And 3 months later, oh, it looks like there's tension within the Riot Squad. Like they don't know how to use this fucking team like a team.
Yeah.
They just like pop them on TV every once in a while. So it wasn't like she was actually doing anything long term, storyline wise. So it's stupid for them to cut her because one, she's really good, and two, she was on TV. But also, like, it's just a simple way for them to kind of cut the numbers, you know?
Yeah, but I mean, when you look at the main roster now as well, you like Raw and SmackDown often features wrestlers wrestling like multiple matches a night because they don't have enough guys on the roster. And it's like, well, why are we in this position where they don't have enough wrestlers on the main roster, yet they're still willing to cut the ones that they do have, which they could be using more and doing something with.
I think that's true for the women's division, but I feel like the reason that they're using people twice in a night isn't because the rosters aren't that big. If anything, they have been accused of having rosters that are too big. I was about to say we and other podcasts like us, but of course there are another podcasts like us because we're the only podcasts in time. But hypothetical other podcasts would say that their roster was so big and they weren't using so much of their roster anyway. There was a lot of people they weren't using. They had a lot of great talent all at once. And for everybody to get a go on TV, some people are going to have to be left out. Now, that should mean that now the roster has been trimmed, that we'll actually get to see some of these talents brought to the forefront. That's the hypothetical.
Yeah, I mean, I would be shocked if we don't see a bunch of NXT call-ups in the near future.
To do nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
They'll all lose to Charlotte Flair, including the boys, and then that'll be it. And that's a shame because I feel like somebody was talking about how thin the SmackDown women's roster is now, and I'm like, why do you think that is? Why? Yes, I agree that it is shocking for a women's division. Why do you think there's only so many people in it right now? What's Io Shirai up to these days? Come on, man. It's not it's not rocket science. I mean, it would be a different story because of the women's tag team titles they have. Now, they have 2 sets of tag titles for the women that they don't need.
Yeah.
If they had one set of then they were defending that one set of tag titles in NXT, and that was awesome. And they should have kept doing that, and they didn't. They just made separate titles, and one of which are going to be pretty successful, and the other half, I would be surprised if they were still around this time next year. Those main roster women's tag titles are on the way out too.
Yeah.
100%. Like, they just couldn't give a shit. I would not be surprised if Tamina and Natalya were the last champions, to be honest with you. That's the end of that. I'd imagine. I mean, it blows your mind that they got rid of Ruby Riott and they kept Tamina. Not only did they keep Tamina, but they give her a fucking belt. They're like, this is what we think of you, Ruby Riott. Your good work and your excellent character strengths. Get the fuck out of here. But Tamina, there's money.
Well, I mean, looking at it objectively as well, they're both really well liked and respected backstage. Like, you hear some of the interviews or like the like tweets and comments that some of the other women's roster have kind of come out with recently. Like when Tamina won the tag title with Natalya, people were like women on the roster were over the moon and like super happy for her, which goes to show she's like she's a valuable member of the WWE family, I guess, in that sense. And Ruby Riott as well. Like, people were saying all these stories about how she was the best backstage and she'd organize stuff and you'd do things to try and improve morale and stuff like that. And that's the kind of employee you want wrestling for you and being part of your WWE family. But
they got rid of her.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. I don't know. So what do you think about the prospect of the WWE being sold to people then?
I mean, I don't really buy it happening anytime soon, to be honest, because I think certainly while Vince McMahon still has his faculties about him, which I guess is arguable, but but like he will kind of run WWE as long as he can, and I wouldn't be surprised, give it like maybe 5 years, 10 years. Who the fuck knows how long he goes on for. I think his mum's lived till 100 and whatever, so conceivably he could be still running WWE in 25 years time. But yeah, like until he's ready to give it up, I don't see anyone being able to buy it from him, or him being willing to sell it, I should say. But I think they've kind of set things up with like this NBC deal for Raw, and now they've got the WWE Network is pretty much on the NBC app now. So I think that's kind of suggesting that when he is ready to sell, they'll be looking to buy it and give it, their own sort of spin. But you kind of wonder how much value will have been lost in that time, though, because right now WWE have been punching above their weight for so long in terms of TV deals and stuff. Like, considering how dwindling the audience is and how apathetic, podcast I was going to say podcasts like ours, but there's only one.
Of course, podcasts like ours, because we're the only podcast in town.
Yeah, but like general reaction to Raw and SmackDown is not particularly good. Like especially this past week with the whole Shayna Baszler and puppet stuff. Like people are just not into that whatsoever.
Weird,
So
isn't it? The people who like pro wrestling don't like puppets.
who'd have thunk it?
Yeah, maybe if you brought light tubes. What if it was a puppet, but it walked around like and it was made out of light tubes? And you just pick up the puppet and hit your opponent with it.
Just bring Nick Gage onto Raw. No. That'll
do. I mean,
are you gonna tell him no?
It would be fun to watch.
Yeah.
That would be genuinely interesting because you're like, I wonder what he'd do.
Whatever the fuck he wants.
I mean, he's not shanking anybody in front of 700 people. How many people watch that show? About 700?
Who knows? Dire.
That's a good point. I wanted to talk about that too at some point. About the ratings, about how low they are across the board. Everywhere. And that's really interesting, how the WWE numbers are dwindling. And, well, it seems like they're dwindling everywhere. It really does seem like right now, I feel like there's an oversaturation of the market.
Yeah.
Which is funny because we've sat through gluts in the market.
Mm-hmm.
We have sat through some real tough times where the WWE were the only game in town. But this is also kind of ties in a little bit to the releases, really, because whenever I say it's become oversaturated, I feel like there's so much wrestling out there for people to watch. The people aren't interested in watching it anymore. There's not enough people for the demand. There's too much supply, which is usually bad in terms of business.
Mm-hmm.
If there's too much stuff for not enough people to enjoy, soon just people will stop caring about it, and a lot of these businesses will go out of business. So I had thought about that with regards to the WWE. If their ratings drops so low, I could see them selling it to somebody else just to make the most amount of profit off it, and then that somebody else just closes it down because by that point there's nothing else to do with it, and then just has their entire back catalog to do with what they want. So that was interesting. But what I also thought about was we had accused the WWE of hoarding talent.
Yeah.
They had huge rosters and they weren't using anybody. So now, this year, when they're getting ready to go back on tour, obviously they're cutting wrestlers to save money for the expenditures that will be them going back on tour. That costs money. But also, it shows an awful lot about the so-called competition in the oversaturated market where there's so many other wrestling. The WWE is no longer the only game in town, but they continue to clown around and they continue to put like stupid, corny bullshit on their TV show because they seem to be unafraid of the competition. So much so that now they're releasing people back into the market, ready to go. They're saying, go ahead. We don't care if you sign for this company anymore. Go ahead. Now, isn't that a big red flag?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting.
That's interesting. That is interesting.
Because they, like you say, they have been hoarding talent for pretty much like the last 5 years or so. And just signing up anyone with any kind of name value or trying to sign them up at least. And now they obviously are much more willing to send these guys out there. Maybe, I don't know, like I saw someone sort of theorizing that maybe their idea is, we'll release these guys and then AEW will sign them up and it'll be like a WCW sort of situation where they had a bloated roster of people, like where they were basically using like 50% of them, but still paying all the others like guaranteed contracts to just sit at home and do nothing.
Right.
It's like maybe like, this is going to be some sort of ploy to fuck with AEW's financials because they'll be like, oh yeah, we'll sign Braun Strowman and we'll pay him, maybe not $1 million a year, but we'll pay him like 750,000. That'll do. And then they're fucked because they're paying Braun Strowman and they're paying all these others and they're not all getting TV time and then they're just wasting their money.
They're wasting their money. See, now here's the thing. AEW recently signed a new, Well, I say recently, it was probably like a couple of weeks ago or whatever. But they signed a new deal with like a TV deal,
Yes.
didn't they? With, well, I don't know what, it's not TNT, it was TBS?
TBS. Yes.
Okay. So that kind of guaranteed like more money coming in. Like that was part of their success to begin with, was the big money TV deals they were able to get. So they had a little bit of money to splash around. And then when the pandemic hit, again, they were saving on touring. So they had a little bit of money to splash around with.
Mm-hmm.
And then with that recent TV deal, they probably have a little bit more money to splash around with.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that. I understand making these really big, like, especially now. And this is what I think plays into that theory of yours. If you think about who the AEW recently signed, Christian, Matt Hardy, Sting,
Big Show,
Mark Henry, right? Those guys aren't cheap at all. And that's a lot of like really, quote unquote, big signings, a lot of big names, all done in a relatively short span of time, right? And now there's been even more releases. How many of them are going to end up, like we've just seen Andrade in AEW, and you can imagine he's probably asking for something similar that he got in WWE.
Of course, yeah.
Right, so that's a lot more money. All of this shit starts to add up, and again, like they have a lot of money to play with, right? And a lot of the guys on that roster are probably making decent contracts, but a lot of them, I think, are making better contracts. Chris Jericho, for example, I would dare say Matt Hardy as well, are probably earning a fair amount of money.
Yes.
Along with those other big names. Sting, I guarantee, is making Goldberg look like a fucking chump with his deal. The amount of work he does, he is having a great time, compared to the money that Tony Khan's making back off his name. You also have to factor in all the other stuff that they've been spending a lot of money on. I think that that's worth keeping an eye on too, because WWE aren't afraid of releasing people, and AEW aren't afraid of hiring people. And it is very sweet of Tony Khan to hire these people during a pandemic and to keep, the money coming in for these people, because it's very hard for a lot of them to make their money on the independents, especially when there's a fucking pandemic. So, I can commend that guy for that. Fair play, keeping these guys employed. What a lovely thing to do.
Yeah.
Now we're coming out of the pandemic, and they're going to go back into live touring. They've released what, 3 people in the entire time they've been a company?
Pretty much. I mean, yeah, I think they let a couple of contracts expire recently with like Awesome Kong and someone else. I can't remember who, but
the people they're letting go or letting contracts expire, yada yada, aren't big money people.
No.
By a long chalk. They're just regular people. They're still, I don't know, man. I think that's really important. I mean, it's nice and all to see these guys, but like, you think about it, man. Mark Henry, does that guy need a paycheck right now? Big Show? Christian, do they need to be there?
Well, no, but I mean, I can see it from AEW's point of view as well, though, wanting some kind of name value that's familiar with WWE fans in the hope of, I guess, like drawing their attention over towards them. But
that's
whether that works,
smart business, right? Exactly. Like, we haven't seen if this works, and this has an air of, old TNA about it. This is what happened, and old TNA was pretty good for a while, but it wasn't. Yeah, and also it wasn't perfect. Let's be honest, it had a lot of problems to it. But it was a good way for some of these old WWE guys like Rhino and Christian, and if you want to say Jeff Jarrett, fair enough, to but like Raven as well had a great run.
Yeah,
good ways for these guys to get over. Now, that's not what AEW is about. That the executives who made AEW didn't come into this thinking we're gonna let all these old WWE guys get on TV. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think AEW have spent too much money at the moment. Now, their TV deals are going to make them money, but that's only going to last so long. And with all of these new releases, they can sign all these people up, but if they're not balancing the books by the end of the year, they're just going to be pissing out money, which is exactly what WCW did. They were just
Mm-hmm.
pissing out money, and they got lucky with the NWO. After the
Yeah.
NWO, they were able to piss out money, but because of the NWO, there was only a finite amount of money to piss out because they were taking most of it.
Well, and they had Ted Turner bankrolling them just willy nilly as well. Like he
Well,
would give
yeah,
them whatever they wanted until things started getting really bad, and then
but
people started taking up notice.
what I mean by that is the NWO was a thing that got WCW really noticed,
Mm.
and therefore they took a fair amount of that money. You know, so my comparison is AW don't have the NWO. They don't have an angle. They don't have anything like, and clearly they're trying to do something with stables because they think that's the only way to do it.
Mm.
But the way to make a big money angle isn't through just loads of stables that feud with each other, because that didn't work in 1998.
Yeah.
Right? That was a terrible idea because of the way they did it. It didn't work. It was a good idea in theory. It didn't work because they don't have an angle. They don't have a big thing. So they're going to be by the end of the year, they're going to be pissing out money without the big angle that attracts the viewership. We know they have a loyal viewer base, but the show moving to Fridays occasionally shows how thin that hardcore viewer base is.
Mm.
500,000 viewers on Fridays. The last couple of Friday shows have been 500,000.
Yeah.
The YouTube clips get that. You know what I mean? Like what it says to me all across the board is that people don't want to watch wrestling anymore. And yet, I don't think there's ever been a time when there's been so many wrestlers. Everybody's a wrestler.
Yeah.
So many. And now that the pandemic's over and people are going to, well, not over, but now that we're starting to open up again, people are going to be able to go back out again and enjoy themselves. And now we're going to see all these old wrestlers that have been released, plus all these new wrestlers who want to be wrestlers. And they're going to be wrestling in front of 10 people because over the pandemic, people just don't care about wrestling anymore.
I mean, I think it's worth pointing out as well, it's not just that wrestling is losing fans, it's that there's so many other choices, to spend your time that's outside of the realm of wrestling, with so many different channels and sports and, subscription services like Netflix and whatever. There's, so many options out there now that it's kind of, like you were saying before, flooded the market. And so it's that much harder to kind of grab people's attention. Like you can see it in ratings for other TV shows and stuff as well, where they're not anywhere near as high as they were like 10 years or 20 years ago. So it's just the downward trend that TV is sort of seeing. So it's not a wrestling exclusive problem, but
I think that's wrestling, because it's an episodic show, is allowed to exist forever. So just like baseball and football, etc. But like if an actual show goes on for 20 seasons, then it should never. No show should go on for 20 seasons. That's ridiculous, right?
Try telling that to the Simpsons.
I did, and they wouldn't listen. But like it's true. You pick any show in the world, if it's gone past 20 seasons, it's too many.
There's going to be a dip in quality.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not worth it, right? It's a totally different show. Well, yeah, the market might get saturated for wrestling. Fortunately for us, we happen to be the only wrestling podcast in town, so our market won't get oversaturated at all.
Mm-hmm.
We are safe. We are free. We're going to be okay. You and me, we're not going to get fired. Everybody listens to our show, the only wrestling show in town. Thank God. God, can you imagine if there was like 1 million wrestling podcasts?
God, that'd be the worst.
Nobody would ever listen to our show. That would be terrible. But fortunately, that's all make-believe. So, yeah, we kind of talked about the releases.
Yeah, sort of started and then talked about other stuff.
We did, but that's what you get. You get variety on a wrestling podcast, you know what I mean? That's what we do for people. That's what we do. And it was entertaining to boot. And it was over 2 hours before Raw. So that's a plus as well. At least it's not 3 hours long.
Mm-hmm.
It's another tick in our win column for being a great podcast. All right, I think that's gonna wrap things up. I don't know what else we can say about this. Said pretty much everything about this topic. So that's gonna do us for today's episode. This was a lot of fun. I really like this one. Some of the other ones, not so much. But this one, that's an A-star. You know, all our fans know. They're like, this is the golden age. You know.
Yeah.
If you like the show, give us a little subscribe and all that stuff. It really helps. Share it about. Some people still talk about wrestling, so share this podcast with the places where people still give a shit about wrestling. That really helps us out, and we appreciate it, I guess. So thank you very much. We're gonna be back next week with some other show. I don't know what it's gonna be about. Probably about dolls. It looks like it feels like that's the way this shit's going these days.
Yeah.
Pro wrestling podcast about dolls.
Just wouldn't work.
Nick Gage would rip our fucking throats out. Good luck, Zack Ryder. It's gonna anyway. Yeah. Anyway, so I guess that's the end of the show. We'll see you next week for another excellent episode of Wrestling Doesn't Make Sense. So good day.
Bye-bye.